got the idea for this experiment was I went to a concert and I was hearing one of my favorite pieces, the Mozart Piano Concerto, and it just left me flat. And I thought, well, how can that be? You know, it's got this beautiful set of notes. The composer wrote this beautiful piece. What is it the pianist is doing to mess this up? And I spoke with one of my doctoral students about it, Anjali Bhattara, and she was very interested in the question also, and how we might pursue this with the techniques of a modern psychological laboratory. One of the interesting things about the piano is that all of the expressive nuance that comes from it comes from really just a definable set of parameters that the pianist has under his or her control. Pianist can decide when to hit the key, when to let up the key, how hard to hit it, and then where to put the pedal. And everything that we hear, whether it's tears of joy or tears of boredom, comes from those 4 decisions that the pianist makes. These are a small enough set of things that we can manipulate them in the laboratory. So Anjali took performances by a master concert pianist, Tom Plant, from our McGill Music Conservatory, Chopin pieces, and then Anjali went into the computer and manipulated them, editing out all of the expressive nuance that comes from variations in timing and variations in loudness. So again, what separates an emotional performance from a non-emotional one is the pianist is making some notes louder and some softer, and some faster and some slower. And it's that variation that gives it the expressivity. Well, Anjali got rid of all of that and brought it to a really robotic performance, and then added in the computer, systematically, little bits of expression, a little bit at a time, creating a continuum of emotional versions. We used a specially prepared piano, the Yamaha disc clavier, which has a bunch of motors underneath every key and a bunch of sensors. When a pianist sits down, the keys register through the sensors all of the touch parameters, when the key was hit, when it's released, how hard. And then the motors allow us to replicate the performance. It's an electronic, elaborate, computerized player piano. Okay, I'm going to play you different versions of some musical pieces by Chopin. And just listen and write down on a scale of 1 to 10 how expressive you find each piece to be, with 1 being the least expressive and 10 being the most. We then brought people into the laboratory and they listened to these different versions in random order. They had no idea what we had done or what they were listening to, and their task was simply to rate on a scale of essentially 1 to 100, or 1 to 10, depending on the condition, how expressive or how emotional do you find this piece to be. Here's another one. People love watching the piano play on its own. We got this through a federal government program, the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. They bought us 3 of these specially prepared pianos to do just this kind of work. They found the task easy. They understood it. They understood that effectively they had to rank order the performances by assigning a score between 1 and 10. And the astonishing thing was that even though they didn't know what we had done, their scores reflected that they understood the rank ordering. We recaptured that order. So they consistently, over all these different pieces and all these different versions, rated the one with the most expressivity as most expressive and the one with the least expressivity as the least, and all the intermediate versions in between. One interesting thing is we brought in both musicians and non-musicians, and we screened them for their background. We found that musicians were more sensitive to the manipulation. In other words, they found a greater disparity between the expressive and the non-expressive than did the non-musicians. Both groups were able to tell the difference between, say, 25% and 50% expressive, but the musicians accentuated the difference in their own minds. They were more sensitive to it. We're hoping that this study will just be the first in what will be a whole range of studies looking at expressivity in different periods of music, not just, classical, but popular and jazz, and not just the piano, but other instruments. We think that the technique really opens up a whole new set of possibilities. One thing that this could lead to is better instructional methods. So a novice student or even an advanced student could have their performance analyzed and compared to that of a master, and they could see on a computer screen, well, your timing isn't quite as varied as the experts, or you're putting timing variation in here where the expert puts it in there. I mean, these are all things that would be very laborious and very time-consuming to do with performers, and the computer could take over that instructional aspect. The thing that makes me most excited about this is that we took something that people said couldn't be done. That's the scientific study of musical expression and emotion, and we quantified it. And to me, there was this challenge of how do you study music in all of its complexity and beauty while still allowing it to be music. Usually we take things in the laboratory, we look at one note at a time, and we're looking at things that are very removed from a real-life musical experience. And this is very much like a real-life musical experience. It's like listening to a good pianist versus a bad. In the last 20 years, there's been an increasing move towards using electronic instruments and sequencers and computers to make the music that have very precise timing and very precise beats. And what we lose in that is a lot of the human element, the human expression. Stevie Wonder and I were talking about how about 20 years ago, around the time his album sales started to fall, was the time that he moved to drum machines. And he hadn't made the connection before, but there's an expressivity and a life missing from those drum machines, to the point that now Stevie Wonder and Donald Fagen from Steely Dan and others take the drum machine and try to add in the kind of variability that we're measuring here to make them more lifelike. I think the music industry may pay attention to this study in a way that they might not have paid attention to a lot of what we neuroscientists of music do, because typically we bring in little pieces of music, a note at a time or two notes, what I call beep and boop experiments. You beep, 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 beep. And we're trying to study music in a controlled scientific fashion, and the music industry has to some degree, and correctly said, well, that's not really music. Whatever you learn may not really apply to real musicians and real musical contexts. And I think this is an important first step towards using real music and bringing it into the laboratory and combining rigorous scientific methods with the more expressive aspects and artistic aspects of music.